I spent 20 years in the Army. 2 tours in Vietnam.
Let me tell you, Mr. Miller, stop.
I earned the right off.
Most people crumble under the pressure of a trial, especially when their freedom hangs in the balance. But for some white supremacists facing legal consequences, defiance can sometimes be their strategy.
There's nothing that I heard in this trial to suggest anything's changed, even if you're correct.
Today, we'll see just how far that defiance can take them, with some truly outrageous courtroom meltdowns. These outbursts will leave you wondering, what makes these individuals cling to their hateful ideologies, even when it lands them in legal hot water? Let's get started. Tyler Clark. This is Tyler Clark, a notorious leader of a white supremacist gang in Texas. In December 2023, he was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment for the brutal, aggravated kidnapping and assault of his girlfriend.
He was convicted of family violence and aggravated kidnapping, sentenced to life in prison.
But how did things escalate to this point? Let's go back to how it all started. In October 2022, Clark kidnapped his girlfriend and subjected her to more than an hour of relentless beating as he drove her down Texas State Highway 99 from Harris County into Montgomery County. Their relationship had been fraught with tension leading up to this horrifying incident. The argument that set off the chain of events occurred when Clark became furious with his girlfriend for wearing a crop top to an event. Enraged, he labeled her a whore. Distressed and seeking refuge, the woman left the event and went to a family member's house, contemplating breaking up with Clark. However, Clark, who was also a tow truck driver, tracked her down. The situation escalated dramatically when he attempted to tow her car with her still inside it. When she got out of the vehicle, Clark forcibly threw her into his tow truck, driving off while screaming at her to obey him. He warned her that he would kill her if she did not comply. Clark then used a locking knife from the vehicle to cut his girlfriend's hair. As she screamed, he threatened to slash her throat. Then he grabbed a metal tool from the back seat, known as an L-bar, and brutally beat her on the head, arms, and legs. The violence was so severe that she lost consciousness. When she came to, she found herself on Clark's lap, with him biting her back and legs. Her chance to escape came when Clark stopped the car at a red light. She bolted from the vehicle, her face so battered that she was unrecognizable. A passerby found her running out of a ditch near Lake Houston Wilderness Park, covered in bruises. The Good Samaritan rushed her to the hospital for medical care. Following the vicious attack, Clark went on the run. He was eventually involved in a standoff with law enforcement before being apprehended. Clark's criminal history revealed a pattern of violence. According to court records, he had been charged and convicted in 2018 for similar domestic violence and assault crimes. During his trial, at least 4 other women testified against him, recounting their own harrowing experiences. When the life sentence was handed down, Clark could not contain his rage. He interrupted his former girlfriend's victim impact statement, ignoring the judge's orders to stay silent. The victim later remarked that Clark's behavior in court demonstrated to the jury that they had made the right decision. Payton Jenden. It was May 14, 2022, when a devastating mass shooting occurred at a Tops Friendly Market supermarket in the East Side neighborhood of Buffalo, New York. The tragic event resulted in the deaths of 10 people, all of whom were African American, and left 3 others injured. The shooter was identified as 18-year-old Payton Jenden.
The president is expected to call for federal hate crime legislation so that what happened here never happens again.
Jenden was heavily armed, carrying a Bushmaster XM-15 rifle modified to accept high-capacity magazines, along with multiple 30-round ammunition magazines. In his car, he also had a Savage Arms Axis XP hunting rifle and a Mossberg 500 shotgun. Dressed in body armor and a military helmet, Jenden live-streamed the attack using a head-mounted camera. The live stream was broadcast on the online service Twitch, but was shut down by the platform within 2 minutes. The attack began in the supermarket's parking lot, where Jenden shot 4 people, killing 3 of them. He then entered the store, where he shot 8 more people, killing 6. The victims' ages ranged from 32 to 86 years old. The rampage finally came to an end when Jenden was apprehended by the authorities. Investigators uncovered a disturbing manifesto Jenden wrote. revealing his twisted beliefs. He identified as an ethno-nationalist, a white supremacist who believed in the violent overthrow of a supposed threat to the white race. He even subscribed to a far-right conspiracy theory known as the Great Replacement, which suggests a deliberate effort to replace white populations with non-white immigrants. Jenden was charged with first-degree murder, and he formally entered a plea of not guilty on May 19, 2022. However, months later, he changed his plea to guilty, admitting to all state charges related to the shooting, including murder, domestic terrorism, and hate crimes. On February 15, 2023, during Jenden's sentencing, the courtroom was charged with tension. A man from the audience, overcome with anger, charged at Jenden but was quickly restrained by security. After a brief 10-minute recess, the proceedings resumed, marked by emotional testimonies from those who lost loved ones or were injured in the attack. During the hearing, Jenden was visibly emotional, shedding tears during some of the testimonies. In a brief statement, he apologized to the victims and their families, acknowledging that he shot and killed people because they were black. The responses to his apology were mixed. Some condemned him angrily. Others quoted from the Bible or mentioned they were praying for him. Many pointed out that he deliberately targeted a black community far from his predominantly white hometown. In the end, justice was served, but not in the way some might have hoped. Jenden was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences, ensuring he would never be released from prison. This wasn't the end of the story, though. Federal charges were also brought against Jenden, and unlike the state case, these carried the ultimate penalty, the death sentence. Prosecutors argued that the cold calculation behind his choice of location, his racist ideology, and the extensive planning that went into the attack all justified capital punishment. Jenden's defense attorney indicated that Jenden is prepared to plead guilty in federal court as well, hoping to avoid the death penalty. James Alex Fields. In court, James Alex Fields, an avowed neo-Nazi, appeared emotionless, staring straight ahead and avoiding eye contact with anyone who spoke. He apologized for the hurt and loss he had caused before the judge handed down his life sentence. But what did Fields do to warrant such a severe punishment? The answer lies in the events that unfolded in Charlottesville, Virginia, on August 12, 2017.
Social media sites have also been cracking down on these neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups.
That day, Fields drove his Dodge Challenger at high speed into a crowd of counter-protesters. According to a crash reconstructionist, his car was moving at an estimated speed of 23 to 28 miles per hour when it slammed into pedestrians, creating a horrifying scene. The impact sent people flying through the air and caused a chain reaction, with a white sedan hit by Fields' car crashing into a maroon minivan, which then struck more pedestrians. After the initial impact, Fields reversed his car, hitting more people as his front bumper scraped the road. A deputy eventually stopped and arrested Fields about a mile from the attack site. It was reported that the Dodge had holes in the rear window, heavy front-end damage, and was splattered with blood and flesh. In total, 35 people were injured in the attack. Tragically, a 32-year-old woman named Heather Heyer died from her injuries at the hospital. As investigators pieced together the events leading up to the attack, a disturbing picture of James Alex Fields began to emerge. Former classmates spoke of his fascination with Nazi ideology, recalling how he would draw swastikas and openly admire Adolf Hitler as early as middle school. This obsession continued into high school, where a history teacher described Fields as being deeply into white supremacy and Hitler. In fact, such was Fields' reverence for the Nazi dictator that he kept a picture of him by his bedside. According to his high school history teacher, Derek Weimer, Fields had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and prescribed antipsychotic medication to manage his anger. Later, Fields himself disclosed to a judge that he was receiving treatment for a combination of mental health conditions, including bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. When Fields was a senior in high school, he applied to join the United States Army, believing that exposure to people of different races and backgrounds might help dispel Fields' white supremacist views. Weimer assisted him with the application. However, Fields was eventually rejected from the military. It was also revealed that Fields had a history of violent behavior toward his mother. In November 2010, she had to lock herself in a bathroom out of fear. She reported to the police that Fields had taken her phone, struck her head, put his hands over her mouth, and threatened to beat her after she told him to stop playing video games. Following subsequent threats, he was arrested and held in juvenile detention. The legal proceedings that followed the Charlottesville tragedy were a long and difficult process. Initially, Fields pleaded not guilty to all 30 federal hate crime charges stemming from the 2017 attack. However, on March 27, 2019, Fields changed his plea, admitting guilt to 29 of 30 hate crime charges. This plea bargain was likely taken to avoid the death penalty, which was subsequently removed from his potential sentence. Heather Heyer's mother also expressed her opposition to the death penalty, stating that it would not bring her daughter back and that there was no point in killing Fields.
We need to be strong, and these kind of crimes has to stop.
Ultimately, the court agreed. For his hate crimes convictions, Fields received a life sentence in prison on June 28, 2019. This sentence ensured that he would never be free to inflict such harm again. Frazier Glenn Miller, even as he received his sentence, death for 3 cold-blooded murders.
This is the phase of the trial where the jury will decide if Cross deserves life in prison or the death penalty.
Frazier Glenn Miller Jr. remained defiant. This unrepentant white supremacist, a man who had spent his life spewing hate, showed no remorse for his crimes. On April 13, 2014, Miller committed a heinous act of violence outside the Jewish Community Center and the Village Shalom Care Center in Overland Park, Kansas. His victims included 14-year-old Reet Underwood, his 69-year-old grandfather William Corporon, and 50-year-old Terry Lamano, who was visiting her mother at a Jewish assisted living facility. Moments after his arrest, Miller shouted "Heil Hitler" from the backseat of a police car while handcuffed, and asked the arresting officer how many Jews he had killed. In subsequent interviews with the media, 7 months later, Miller, suffering from advanced lung disease, claimed he believed he was dying at the time of the shootings and wanted to ensure he targeted Jews before his death. Miller's disturbing history revealed that he was the founder and former leader of the Carolina Knights of the Ku Klux Klan and the White Patriot Party, both paramilitary organizations active in the 1980s. He dropped out of high school as a senior to join the United States Army. However, his military service wouldn't be a turning point for the better. Instead, he became entangled with the National Socialist Party of America, a notorious neo-Nazi group. This association would have a profound impact on him, leading him down a rabbit hole of extremism. In 1979, members of this same group were responsible for a deadly attack on civil rights marchers in Greensboro, North Carolina. His extremist activities led to death threats against his family, prompting his wife to leave him and move to Chicago with their children. Forced to retire from the Army in 1979 due to his Klan-related activities, Miller then enrolled in Johnston Technical College in Smithfield, North Carolina, while simultaneously establishing the Carolina Knights of the Ku Klux Klan on his 25-acre farm near Raleigh. Here he stockpiled illegal weapons and conducted paramilitary training for his followers, terrorizing Black and Jewish communities through cross burnings, threats against public figures, and the distribution of hate propaganda. Despite his extremist background, Miller attempted to enter politics but found little support. He ran in the Democratic primary for North Carolina governor in 1984 and sought the Republican nomination for a state Senate seat in 1986. He failed in both attempts. In 1987, Miller pleaded guilty to a weapons charge and mailing a threat. He had been indicted alongside 4 other white supremacists for plotting to acquire stolen military weapons, planning robberies, and conspiring to assassinate Morris Dees, co-founder of the Southern Poverty Law Center. In a deal with federal prosecutors, Miller received a 5-year prison sentence in exchange for testifying against 14 white supremacist leaders in a 1988 sedition trial in Fort Smith, Arkansas. He served 3 years behind bars. After his release, Miller seemed to fade from law enforcement's focus, partly because he claimed to have turned his life around as a born-again Christian. However, during the 2000s, he resurfaced in white supremacist circles, this time intensifying his focus on anti-Semitism. He actively posted on racist internet forums and even purchased anti-Semitic radio adverts under the guise of political campaigns. Following the horrific 2014 shooting in Overland Park, Kansas, Miller openly admitted that he had targeted Jews during the attack, despite all 3 victims being Christians. During his trial, he opted to represent himself, using the courtroom as a platform for his hateful views. He asked witnesses if they were Jewish, was reprimanded by the judge for shouting "Sieg Heil," distributed anti-Semitic pamphlets to reporters, and used his closing arguments to rail against Jews controlling the government. On the day the jury found him guilty of capital murder and 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, Miller defiantly shouted "Sieg Heil" while giving the Nazi salute from his wheelchair in the Johnson County courtroom. He also expressed hope that the jurors would struggle with guilt. Moments after receiving the death sentence from the judge in November 2015, Miller screamed his hate-filled rhetoric from his wheelchair. Miller eventually died from natural causes at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Butler County, Kansas, on May 3, 2021, at the age of 80. James Harris Jackson. James Harris Jackson, a white Army veteran, harbored a deep-seated hatred for black men and was determined to kill one.
Police say he stabbed one man to death, but stopped there and turned himself into authorities.
In a manifesto decorated with a swastika and a crusader's cross, he declared, "The racial world war starts today. This political terrorist attack is a formal declaration of global total war on the Negro races." On St. Patrick's Day in 2017, Jackson boarded a bus in Washington, D.C. and rode it to New York City, believing that his attack would gain the most media attention there. Upon arriving, he checked into a hotel on West 46th Street and spent the next 3 days stalking potential victims. At around 11:15 p.m. on March 20th, Jackson spotted 66-year-old Timothy Common rummaging through trash on West 36th Street near 9th Avenue. Common, an avid recycler, lived nearby in a room at the Barber Hotel, which now houses formerly homeless people transitioning to permanent housing. Jackson approached Common from behind and stabbed him multiple times with a short sword, inflicting wounds to several of his organs. Despite his injuries, Common managed to walk to a police station on West 35th Street, where officers called an ambulance. He was taken to Bellevue Hospital, where he later died. The following day, Jackson turned himself in at a police substation in Times Square, bringing an end to his brief but tragic spree of violence. As investigators dug deeper into James Harris Jackson's background, a disturbing online trail emerged. His internet searches revealed a fascination with Dylan Roof, the white supremacist who killed 9 black parishioners in a South Carolina church in 2015. Jackson's internet search history showed he had researched Roof extensively. Jackson eventually pleaded guilty to the rare state charges of murder as terrorism and murder as a hate crime.
It's well over 10 years that he has been harboring these feelings of hate towards male blacks.
During his sentencing, he offered an apology, stating that the crime never should have happened, and if he could redo everything, it wouldn't have happened. However, the relatives and friends of Timothy Common, the man Jackson killed, found his apology insincere and insulting. Richard Peake, one of Common's cousins, described Timothy as the complete opposite of Jackson. Peake painted a picture of a man who understood that life was about caring for family and others. He was a man of modest means, but rich in experiences, knowledge, and love. While Peake spoke, Jackson nonchalantly tapped his foot on the floor, showing little genuine remorse. In the end, Jackson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now it's time for today's subscriber's pick. The image we are featuring is striking and disturbing. In the image, we see 2 starkly contrasting figures. On the left, a man stands in a courtroom, covered head to toe in a white garment that leaves only his face exposed. He appears agitated, gripping a bat with a determined intensity. On the right, An older man, also in a courtroom, looks equally disturbed. His face bears the signs of a recent assault, bloodied and bruised. These individuals represent a dark chapter in our society's history. Both are said to be KKK members who went crazy in the courtroom, epitomizing the volatile and violent nature of white supremacist groups. Their actions and beliefs have left an indelible mark on their communities. But what do you think went down in these courtrooms? Let us know in the comments below. Edward Matthews. When you think you can spew hate with impunity, that the law doesn't apply to you, reality has a way of delivering a rude awakening. Such was the case for Edward Matthews, a resident of Mount Laurel, New Jersey, who learned a harsh lesson in 2021. A video of Matthews' racist rant towards a neighbor went viral, igniting outrage in his community. His tirade wasn't some momentary outburst. The video captured him hurling insults and racial slurs with a venomous intensity. As if daring someone to challenge him, Matthews even made an invitation by providing his home address and asking who dared to come see him. Little did he know this would be a colossal miscalculation. 3 days later, hundreds of people from around the region arrived at his home, chanting his name and demanding his arrest. The situation had already escalated before the viral video. A resident, fed up with Matthews' harassment, filed a complaint with the Mount Laurel Police Department. Shortly after, officers responded to a call about a man, Matthews, as it turned out, who needed to be removed from the area. Arriving at the scene, they found Matthews in the middle of a verbal altercation with 4 neighbors, his language laced with racial slurs. This wasn't an isolated incident. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern of abuse.
Rural residents are calling for action in a case that is getting national attention.
Matthews had a history of racist behavior. He had called black residents monkeys, put feces on their property, and sent threatening emails and letters. As if that wasn't enough, he even resorted to property damage, firing BB pellets at their cars. In a subsequent interview with local media, Matthews claimed his conduct stemmed from a long-running housing dispute involving the Homeowners Association and that he was drunk during the incident. The day of reckoning arrived when police finally took Matthews into custody. The scene outside his home was chaotic. Water bottles and ice were hurled at him and the officers as they moved through the large crowd of protesters to a waiting police vehicle. During the arrest, several officers were hit by pepper spray, adding to the tense and volatile atmosphere. The legal repercussions for Matthews' hate-filled actions were swift and severe. Matthews was charged with 6 offenses related to the viral video, along with another incident involving a female neighbor. In that case, he was accused of being caught on video using slurs and making a lewd gesture while laughing.
Edward Matthews, he remains behind bars.
Altogether, Matthews faced 3 hate crime charges, 2 harassment charges, and 1 trespassing charge. In October 2023, Matthews pled guilty to all the charges against him, including a drug offense. Prosecutors explained that this drug charge was filed after hallucinogenic mushrooms were found during a search of his home. During his sentencing in December 2023, Matthews begged for leniency, sniffling and wiping away tears. He admitted to his wrongdoings and offered a brief apology to the victims for his insensitive and disrespectful words in the past. He expressed remorse over the personal toll his actions had taken, revealing that his behavior had destroyed his marriage and hurt his family. His wife had filed for divorce, sold their townhome, and he had lost all his possessions while spending 2.5 years in jail. Ultimately, Matthews was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with a mandatory minimum of 4 years before he could even be considered for parole. This sentence served as a message not just to Matthews, but to anyone who harbored similar hateful views. There are consequences for bigotry, and justice, though delayed, would ultimately prevail. Nathaniel Veltman. On a sunny day in June 2021, London, Ontario, Canada, a horrific act shattered the peace. 46-year-old Salman Afzal was enjoying an outing with his wife, Madiha Salman, their 15-year-old daughter, Yumna, and his 74-year-old mother, Talat Afzal. Their lives were tragically cut short in a senseless act of hate. As the Afzal family walked together, they were struck by a pickup truck driven by 22-year-old Nathaniel Veltman. The impact was devastating. Salman, Madiha, Yumna, and Talat all died at the scene. The couple's 9-year-old son, the lone survivor, was left with serious injuries. When London police caught up to Veltman in the Cherry Hill Village Mall parking lot, he was already on his knees beside his heavily damaged pickup truck, hands on his head. Wearing a bulletproof vest, army helmet, leather jacket, and a white t-shirt with a Crusader cross hand-painted on the front and back, for the meme, Veltman was smiling. For Veltman, it seemed, this act of violence was a twisted joke. As officers apprehended him, Veltman admitted he did it on purpose. While in the police car, he flashed the OK symbol, a gesture that white supremacists have attempted to co-opt. The message was clear.
The jury at the trial of the man accused in the London attack on a Muslim family is set to see more police footage today.
This wasn't a random accident, but a deliberate hate crime. The motive behind the attack became horribly apparent. Police determined Veltman specifically targeted the Afzal family because the women were wearing traditional Pakistani dress. Their faith, their Muslim heritage, made them targets in Veltman's eyes. The news of the attack sent shockwaves through London and beyond. Canadians and people around the world condemned this act of hate. In the wake of the attack, police spoke to Veltman's father, Mark Veltman, who said he and his son were very close and that he had seen his son 2 nights before the murders. He told police he was unaware his son harbored any extremist views or racist beliefs. Police also interviewed Veltman's twin sister, who mentioned that her brother made really offensive jokes about minorities, but never thought he would act on them. A friend who had worked with Veltman the day he murdered the Afzals said Veltman looked tired and had mentioned he used hallucinogenic mushrooms the night before. The legal battle that followed the L attack was long and complex. Canada's Attorney General, reflecting the severity of the crime, approved terror charges against Veltman. In addition to these charges, Veltman also faced 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 charge of attempted murder. Veltman's defense team, however, took a different approach. They opted to plead not guilty to the murder charges, arguing instead for a lesser charge of manslaughter. Their strategy focused on portraying Veltman as mentally unstable, someone whose actions couldn't be fully attributed to malice. The trial, which began in September 2023 in Windsor, Ontario, stretched on for 12 long weeks. During this time, a disturbing portrait of Veltman's ideology emerged. Evidence presented by the prosecution revealed that Veltman harbored right-wing extremist and Islamophobic views. He openly identified as a white nationalist, a label that left no doubt about his motivations. The jury also learned that Veltman had spent a month prior to the attack crafting a document advocating for violence, a document clearly inspired by notorious mass murders from New Zealand and Norway. Veltman himself took the stand in his defense, attempting to explain his actions. He spoke of a difficult childhood, a strict Christian upbringing that left him emotionally scarred. He also claimed to struggle with obsessive-compulsive disorder. In a desperate attempt to deflect blame, Veltman further asserted that taking magic mushrooms just days before the attack had left him disconnected from reality. The judge, however, saw through these claims and dismissed Veltman's explanations as inadequate justifications for his horrific act.
He appeared more subdued and refused to answer many of the questions he was asked.
On November 16, 2023, the jury delivered its verdict. Nathaniel Veltman was found guilty on all charges. The deliberate murders of Talat Salman, Syed Salman Afzal, Madiha Salman, and Yumna Afzal, along with the attempted murder of the Afzal family's surviving son. The sentence that followed reflected the gravity of the crimes. Veltman received a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years for each of the first-degree murders. He was also sentenced to life for the attempted murder, ensuring he would spend the rest of his days behind bars. This sentence, while unable to bring back the Afzal family, served as a measure of justice. Thank you for watching and see you in next video.